Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I'm Ian Masters, and today we'll examine a number of stories and issues in the news. We'll begin with the desecration of the People's House, with the East Wing gone in a stealth demolition to be replaced by a monstrous monument to Trump's ego that will dwarf the White House in an enduring insult the worst president in our history has imposed upon us and our history that will torment us for the ages. Joining us to discuss the vanity of evil as history is destroyed for the self-glorification of an American Caesar is Sean Wilentz, the George Henry Davis 1886 Professor of American History at Princeton University, whose writing on American music has earned him 2 Grammy nominations, and his books include Bob Dylan in America and No Property in Man, Slavery and Anti-Slavery, The Nation's Founding, and his forthcoming book is The Fall of American Slavery. And he's the co-producer of the new Bob Dylan album, Through the Open Window, out this week. Then, as a criminal regime corrupts the law to punish its enemies and pardon its friends while enriching the Trump family and his cronies, we'll speak with Sidney Blumenthal, the former assistant and senior advisor to President Bill Clinton and a senior advisor to Hillary Clinton. He has been a national staff reporter for the Washington Post, Washington editor and staff writer for the New Yorker, and his books include the bestsellers The Clinton Wars, The Rise of the Counter-Establishment, and The Permanent Campaign. His latest book is All the Powers on Earth, The Political Life of Abraham Lincoln, 1856 to 1860, and we'll discuss his latest article in The Guardian, Donald Trump has built a regime of retribution and reward. Then finally, we'll speak with Timothy Shenk, an assistant professor of history at George Washington University, a senior editor at Dissent magazine, who has written for the New York Times, The Nation, The New Republic, and Jacobin, among other publications. His new book is Left Adrift, What Happened to Liberal Politics, and we will discuss his article at the New York Times, Democrats Are in Crisis. Eat the Rich Populism is the Only Answer, which calls for a coalition of liberals and populists to unite against Trump by focusing on improving the lives of Americans, not constantly reminding us how bad Trump is. And before we begin with our tax dollars paying for the bombing of innocents abroad and racist thuggery at home, as families are ripped apart and neighbors disappeared from our streets, shops, and schools, we find ourselves at a moral moment when America's better angels have to be mobilized against a cruel and corrupt regime enabled by political cowardice and judicial blindness. The only way to save our democracy from its current descent into fascism is a massive mobilization of people power against a plutocratic-funded 2026 Trump campaign of voter suppression and intimidation by masked government thugs. As Trump cowers the owners of the press and defunds public broadcasting, Background Briefing needs your support to keep providing a reality-based daily briefing that exposes the regime's malevolent machinations to protect and defend our constitutional rights and freedom of speech and assembly. We ask you to make a tax-deductible donation at backgroundbriefing.org/donate or at our foundation, publictruthmedia.org, and thank you for defending the home of the brave and the land of the free. And joining us now, Sean Wilentz, the George Henry Davis 1886 Professor of American History at Princeton University, whose writing on American music has earned him 2 Grammy nominations, and his books include Bob Dylan in America and No Property in Man, Slavery and Anti-Slavery at the Nation's Founding, and his forthcoming book is The Fall of American Slavery, and he's the co-host with Sidney Blumenthal of the podcast The Court of History, and he's the co-producer of Bob Dylan's latest album, Through the Open Window, which will be out soon. I thank you for joining us, Sean Wilentz.
As ever, Ian, a pleasure to be here.
So it's not the best circumstances. I don't know why I am so upset about what's happening to the White House. The idea that the People's House is being desecrated with this monstrosity that's going to absolutely overwhelm the original building. And it's an incredible insult from the worst president in our history to impose this monstrous monument to himself upon us, to torment us for the ages. I mean, the destructions, he did it in a stealth way, promised not to do it, and did it in his typically criminal way that he operates. And the vandalism is unbelievable, tearing down the East Colonnade, tearing
Mhm.
down the whole East Wing, tearing down
Mhm.
Jackie Kennedy's garden after having cemented over the Rose Garden, and then cutting down these magnolia trees, one dedicated to President Harding and FDR.
Mhm.
So, is there any way to stop this?
Huh. Yeah, get him out of office, but he's not, he's just getting started. I mean, this is dictator chic. He is, we've been warning people for a long time that this is what he intended, which was to basically overthrow the American government. That's what he's intending to do. And that's what this is a symbol of in many, many ways, actually, I think. I mean, what you talked about is, the desecration is true. Anyone who's ever seen the White House, been to the White House, visited the White House, takes it as the people, and the Congress is the people's house, but the president lives in the White House because he got there from by the people. It doesn't belong to him. Abraham Lincoln actually has some wonderful remarks about this somewhere. Um, so what he's done is extraordinary. Now, it's not just the destruction part, which is really important to understand what the whole Trump regime is about, because it's essentially evil in the sense that it is basically out to destroy, hurt, traumatize is the word that Russell Vogt uses. That's what they're interested in doing. They're interested in making you suffer. That makes them very happy. Um, but that's certainly a part of it. But it's also, I think, and this is where the politics come in. I think it's really emblematic in more than a symbolic way, but certainly in a symbolic way, of what is really happening here, which is basically the destruction of the American Republic. And I can talk about that in aesthetic terms. I mean, look, first of all, the mass of this thing, okay? 90 square feet,
90,000.
90,000 square feet, correct. Now, if you just lay that out end to end, that's the length of a football field and the width of a football field. I don't know that it's going to be like that, although it's going to be a ballroom, so who knows it's going to be. But it's massive. I mean, the entire main building of the White House is only 55,000 square feet. This is going to dwarf that. So the sheer mass of it is meant to overshadow, to intimidate, to put his stamp on things. And then we get to the next part of it, which is, I think, even more telling, which is the design, the decoration, what it's going to look like inside. We can all say this is just, Trump's tackiness and it's ugly, and that's all true. And what he's done to the Oval Office is disgusting with all the gold and all over the place. But it's the manner in which it's disgusting, I think, is emblematic here. At one level, it's very similar to what you see in the palaces of other dictators. Right? I mean, everyone from, I don't know, Ceausescu to Marcos to you name it. It's all this. It's very, very similar. It's lots of gold everywhere. It's to show off wealth, but it's also to show off power and the power of the dictator, not just the power of the office, but the power of the dictator. And it's all in line with that. The use of gold in particular, but even the way the chairs are arranged, the way that everything is arranged. You're not there to feel comfortable. You're going to be there to worship Donald Trump. And that's the point of it. The dictator. That's what dictatorship is all about. Now let's think about what Washington, D.C. You mentioned the East Colonnade, which was a particularly graceful bit of the architecture. But anyone who's been to Washington, even if you've seen pictures of Washington, you know what they had in mind from the beginning, and which was replicated quite faithfully over the generations, which was to design a city that was going to be the capital of a national republic, which was going to reflect respect for the Roman Republic. Its architecture, all of the columns that you see, like the colonnade, it is a purposefully, what shall we say, spare, unostentatious, but elegant and beautiful testimony to the fact that this is a fact, a republic. Republics were very, very few and far between at the nation's founding, but architecturally, this is what they wanted. They wanted to try to give a sense of our indebtedness aesthetically as well as politically to the Roman Republic. Now we're seeing the fall of the Republic under Trump. because Trump's aesthetic, the dictator chic aesthetic, is completely unspare, completely ungraceful. It models itself, if anything, as a kind of dime store Versailles, right? And the more the glitter, the more the gold, the more the this and that. It's not quite Baroque, but it's got that sensibility of grandeur in a highly undemocratic, highly monarchical way. That's what they want. And that's what's happening now, is that he's literally destroying the old republic and replacing it with his new regime.
So the people that are paying for this, Amazon, Apple,
Yeah,
Comcast,
yeah,
Coinbase, Google, Lockheed Martin, Meta, Microsoft,
yeah,
Palantir, T-Mobile, the Adelson family, Harold
right.
Hamm, the Lutnick family, Steven Schwartzman, and the Winklevoss twins. And that's only half the list I had time to read.
What a gang of monsters. Yeah, go ahead.
Right, but will they also suffer the rebuke of history here along with Trump? Because this is not going to stand. I mean, he's going to do the worst because he's a vandal and he's all about destroying, not building. But I can't see this ever sitting well with anybody except
Well,
the
yeah,
crazies and in MAGA world.
yeah. I mean, it depends on whether he manages to pull off what he's aiming to do, which is to just to overthrow the government. And if he overthrows the government, well, I don't even want to think about where we're headed. Um, but this is what he intends. So the judgment of history, if he fails, will obviously be very, severe. And for all of those, corporations and heads and the Adelsons of the world and all the rest of it. But what it comes to really, right, Ian, is that this is a monument not simply to Donald Trump's grandeur, but to his corruption. That this is a building literally founded on corruption. Because the whole point of giving all that money was to seek favor with him, to make him happy, to feed his own ego, to feed his own imperial ambitions for himself. But it's corrupt. Like everything else that he's done is corrupt. The way that he's wielding the pardon. I mean, we can go on and on about it. I mean, I won't be surprised if they'll be, distributing, Trump meme Bitcoin somewhere inside that ballroom. It's colossal what's going on. This is a monument, not just to his dictatorial side, but to the corruption that helps to finance it, and that not just finances it, but keeps people politically in line. And that's what he knows he's doing here. He's not just taking their money, which he's happy to have. He is ensuring their obedience. He is ensuring their loyalty. He's ensuring their um, um, loyalty, allegiance.
Hmm.
This is their pledge of allegiance to the Trump regime.
So will this reality TV star who's at war with reality, will he conquer reality? For example, he just apparently slapped a 10% tariff on Canada
Yeah,
because he's upset
yeah,
about the Ontario government putting out ads, which happened to
yeah.
be on the baseball game that everybody was watching on
Yes,
Friday night.
yes.
The reality is that Ronald Reagan did say those things about how
Hmm.
terrible tariffs are. That's the
Hmm.
reality. But
Hmm.
that reality was uncomfortable for him. So
Hmm.
he slaps the 10%
Yeah,
tariff on our neighbor. And
that's
also,
right.
by the way, he is so vicious and horrible that in the last time he met Prime Minister Carney, he started to tell Carney these horrible, hateful, nasty jokes about trans people, knowing
Really.
that Carney has a kid who is trans.
Mhm. Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
this is who he is. He's just
Well,
a
this is the evil part. No, this is the point of hurting people. This is the point of ridiculing people, diminishing people, because he's got, I mean, I don't want to psychoanalyze him, but it's pretty simple to see what's going on here. He's got a hole in him that is, enormous, and he is so guarded against being hurt that he lashes out at everyone, and he is he revels in your pain. Remember, Bill Clinton used to say, I feel your pain. People kind of made fun of that after a while, but it was genuine. So he was empathizing with people. Donald Trump wants to inflict pain. He wants you to suffer. And if he has a chance to make you feel uncomfortable or degraded or humiliated, he will do it. That is his style. And not just his style. That's not what I'm really saying. It goes to the heart of what Trumpism is. which is not just a kind of replay of the fall of the Roman Empire, which it is, in my view, but it's also it's predicated, it's almost nihilist in the sense that it's not standing for any there's no ideology here. There's no set of ideas, principles, as hateful as they might be. If this were a, let us say a racist regime, a kind of Jim Crow regime. All right, well, they believe that black people are inferior and that's what they believe. This has nothing like that. Even that. It's based on pure evil. That's the only way I can see it.
Right,
I
but
mean, if I were more if I were a more religious person than I am, I wouldn't necessarily put it this way because that might be blasphemous. But I'm thinking of the Antichrist. That's what we're talking about here. And at least let me make it a metaphor rather than to say it's literal, because it's not theological, and I'm not in a position to say something like that. But what I'm saying is that he is so out of step with not simply the Constitution and the values of American politics, but of the spirit of American life. Which is based on cooperation as well as individualism. It's a kind of collective individualism. We do our own thing, but we look out for each other. This is a man who's dedicated to humiliating everyone, including the people who are closest to him. If you get close to him for long enough, you're going to be humiliated. Look what happened to poor Roy Cohn. I mean, I would never think of saying poor Roy Cohn, but even he was humiliated in the end.
Right.
So,
He said he's got ice water in his veins. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
So but this has now been systematized. So you have people like Miller and Vogt and others who have, who are similarly driven. And it will it succeed in the end? I'm an historian, not a prognosticator. I can't imagine it succeeding. But if you have the Supreme Court of the United States willing to support this stuff, to clear the way, to give him complete immunity, which is at the heart of his ability to do all of this stuff. That immunity decision, a year and a half ago was, as I said at the time, the Dred Scott of our time, the worst decision in American history, Supreme Court decision since Dred Scott, and maybe even worse, because it's enabled the president to become a criminal and with impunity. And that's what's happening. So it's pretty gloomy. Well, I'm not being gloomy about the country, essentially. I'm being gloomy about what we will not succeed in overthrowing this stuff until we take the full measure of what it's about. And that's what I think people are still, there's a lot of people who still think this is just a partisan problem, or the Republican Party has to be defeated. Well, it does, to be sure. But this is beyond that. These people really intend, as I say, they are revolutionaries. They have said so. If you read Project 2025, that's exactly what they said they were going to do, was to overthrow the government, or to overthrow what they called, they had the euphemism for it, but that's what they're intending to do. We're in the midst of a reactionary, not just reactionary, but a kind of, as I say, more Caesarist revolution that is destroying the American government as we know it. And
well, Sean, we've run out of time, I'm afraid.
and then we just started talking about architecture and see where we've gone. I don't mean to get,
right, but I think the landing on the season note, I think resonates, and I thank you for joining us here today. I appreciate it.
Anytime, Ian. See you soon.
And again, I've been speaking with Sean Wilentz. This is George Henry Davis, 1886 professor of American history at Princeton University, whose writing on American music has earned him 2 Grammy nominations, and his books include Bob Dylan in America and No Property in Man, Slavery and Anti-Slavery at the Nation's Founding. And his forthcoming book is The Fall of American Slavery. And he's the co-producer of the new album by Bob Dylan, Through the Open Window, out soon. We're going to take a brief station break. We're back looking into how this criminal regime corrupts the law to punish its enemies and pardon its friends while enriching the Trump family and his cronies.
They paved paradise, put up a parking lot with a pink hotel, a boutique, and a swinging hot spot. Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? They paved paradise.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Sidney Blumenthal, a former assistant and senior advisor to President Bill Clinton and a senior advisor to Hillary Clinton. He's been a national staff reporter for the Washington Post, Washington editor and staff writer for The New Yorker, and his books include the bestsellers The Clinton Wars, The Rise of the Counter-Establishment, and The Permanent Campaign. His latest book is All the Powers on Earth, The Political Life of Abraham Lincoln, 1856 to 1860. And his latest article at The Guardian is Donald Trump has built a regime of retribution and reward. Welcome to Background Briefing, Sidney Blumenthal.
Always good to be here with you, Ian.
Well, thanks for joining us, Sidney. And I want to talk to you about your article, which is about Trump punishing his enemies and pardoning his friends. But preceding you on today's program is your partner in the Court of History podcast that you do, Sean Wilentz. And since you spent a lot of time in the White House, I just want to get your response to the desecration underway of the White House and the fact that there's going to be a massive distortion with this great white elephant that will dwarf the main building, which was balanced by the East Wing and the West Wing. And the East Wing has now been completely torn down, along with the colonnade, along with Jacqueline Kennedy's garden, along with magnolia trees that were planted for President Harding and for FDR. And the thing that I find galling is that this is going to be an enduring insult by the worst president in our history, who's imposed this monstrous monument to himself upon us to torment us for the ages.
Yeah, well, it goes with everyone has said that this is a symbol, a metaphor, a representation of Trump's presidency itself, tearing down the White House. He's tearing down the Constitution. He's tearing down the American Republic. And it's also unlawful, of course. I worked in that building for years, every single day, and I have a deep knowledge of it. I was friendly with Betty Monkton, the late curator of the White House. I befriended her when I was working in the White House with President Clinton. And her office was in the basement in the main building. And in her office, on the stone walls, were the hieroglyphics, the symbols that the stonemasons had carved into it with their own individual signatures, as it were. And also in the basement are the black fire stains left from when the British burned the White House. The public doesn't see that, but they're there. The East Wing was built under Theodore Roosevelt, and I spent many, many interesting times there. They also tore down the movie theater as part of it, which was in the East Wing colonnade. Not only did they show movies there, I remember seeing a lot of movies there with Bill Clinton and Hillary, including Naked Gun 2.5, starring O.J. Simpson. But it was used as a rehearsal place for State of the Union addresses, and we would work for hours and hours with the president there. I remember preparing Hillary for her Senate campaign in that movie theater. The East Wing had its own life. It was distinct from the West Wing, where I had my office. And the East Wing was where the Office of Protocol was, where all the events were planned. It was the military office, and it was formerly the First Lady's office, so that that her staff would be there as well. And it was also the entrance for visitors for important public events. So people would enter through that entrance, and they would walk down a hallway in the colonnade inside, and the press would be there. So for every state dinner, for example, there would be that kind of formal entrance of visitors who then would be photographed by the press. And sort of publicly recognized and acknowledged. It's a complete desecration. I could go on at great length about the symbolism of tearing down the architecture of which is, of course, a federalist architecture. It's reminiscent of the Roman Republic. The framers spoke a great deal about how to retain and sustain republics and not have them degenerate into despotisms and tyrannies. The ballroom is a monument to bad taste and tyranny. Trump's guilt and gold and wretched taste everywhere is totally contrary to the literal functionality and representation of the vision of the White House as it was built. And by the way, it was George Washington who signed the bill to build the White House. So this is a very profound event in the country's history. The White House is a very important building, as central as the Capitol and any other building in the country. If a foreign adversary had done this, we would have declared war on them. So it's a tragic and personally a sad day for me and for many others who had worked and had the privilege of working in the White House.
Well, Sun Tzu said that an evil man will burn his own nation to the ground to rule over the ashes. And we have an evil man who's a criminal, and he's creating a criminal and kleptocratic regime, modeling it on Orban, but taking it so much further. And he's also giving out the traditional dictators dishes of bread and circuses. In this case, of course, he's taking away the bread, meaning in a week's time, 40 plus million people won't be getting SNAP food stamps. But he's doubling down on circuses, killing a bunch of poor fishermen in the Pacific on these so-called drug boats while the drug lords are totally protected. So this is an incredibly disgraceful and frightening time. Do you think the American people are going to wake up? And how much do you think the desecration of the White House might be a wake-up call?
Well, if people are paying attention, there's so many acts by transgressive acts by Trump against the rule of law and the Constitution that people should be quite aware. I mean, just yesterday, Stephen Miller announced on Fox News that his desire to indict or charge J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, with seditious conspiracy for daring to speak out against Miller and Trump's police state regime. But in any case, I've written this article in The Guardian, Ian, about how Trump has turned this into a system and that it's not simply his whimsicality or his rages or his, errant acts. But this is a whole system that he's developing of retribution and reward.
So let's talk about it and how much is it trickling down? Because, for example, Tom Homan was caught in an FBI sting accepting a $50,000 in cash in a bag, and he's still in his job. They dropped the charges because the Department of Justice is now more about protecting Trump and his cronies and breaking the law as opposed to upholding the law. But I think it's probably the corruption is much deeper there because the two main contractors for these private prisons are GeoCorp and GeoGroup and Core Civic. And Homan has ties to both of them. And they're making tons and tons of money out of the taxpayers because they're just warehousing hundreds of thousands of people that they've rounded up randomly and charging the taxpayers enormous amounts of money for terrible food, et cetera, et cetera. So that's to me is an example of not just Trump, and I don't know whether the Trump family are getting a kickback, but I'm sure Homan is. So this is a system, isn't it, that rewards not just the dictator's family, it also rewards his cronies.
Well, um, I point out how the reward system emerged in Trump's second term, and it's the other side of the retribution system. So if you are Trump's friend or ally or supporter or have a financial interest that can benefit him, you're on the reward side. And there's almost no law that you can break and be punished for. So you actually have license. Trump gave a pardon just this week to a convicted felon for money laundering who then invested while in prison in Trump's crypto firm, his son's crypto firm of millions of dollars, and he got a pardon. So this is a payoff system. You raised Tom, and of course, this is the week. There's so many things that have happened. I mean, we forgot that George Santos received a commutation this week. Um, uh, it's uh, it's a direct slap in the face of the House Republicans as well. He was an embarrassment. He was an albatross, and it shows the no, not a single one of them said a word. They'll swallow any embarrassment and insult. Um, and Santos's commutation um, follows what began on Inauguration Day with the pardons or commutations of the sentences of more than 1,500 convicted felons in the January 6th assault on the Capitol. Uh, and by June, more than 16 politicians, financial fraudsters, donors, former Republican congressmen, and so on were pardoned. And Tom Homan doesn't need a pardon because the Department of Justice has decided he's exempt from prosecution for having been taped in a sting operation by FBI agents in September of last year, accepting $50,000 in cash in a kava bag in exchange for promising to deliver federal contracts once he assumed his position under Trump. So Homan has offered a series of conflicting explanations. At first, he said he did nothing criminal, non-denial denial. Then Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, said he never took the cash. Then, when Senator Whitehouse asked Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, on October 7th, what became of the $50,000, she went ballistic and um, and hurled a falsehood against him about some crazy charge about Jeffrey Epstein that was totally untrue and didn't answer the question. And then Homan said, I didn't take $50,000 from anybody. And my view is he might borrow the title from O.J. Simpson's infamous volume, If I Did It. I mean, there are a lot of questions about Homan specifically, including the conflicts of interest involving the for-profit prison companies, but also where's the money? And did he declare it as income? And if he did not, that's illegal. If he did, where is it in the IRS? Did he declare it as income? For what? It was from the FBI in a sting.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's taxpayer money.
it's taxpayer money. Why doesn't he give it back? If the, just one good reason for the Democrats to get control of the House of Representatives and the Senate is to see that tape. But as I say, this is all part of a retribution and rewards system that bypasses all the traditional review processes, all justice. This is the institutionalization of injustice.
As you write, though, in your article at The Guardian, Sidney Blumenthal, Donald Trump has built a regime of retribution and reward. You say that the House of Representatives will swallow any embarrassment and insult with servility. Mikey Johnson has shut it down. He's actually, it's worse than that because he's giving up on the separation of powers. Basically, the House of Representatives does not exist. It has no function except to protect pedophiles.
The shutdown, in great part, is motivated by a desire to suppress the Epstein files and to prevent that subject from being raised. He will not swear in Adelita Grijalva, who was elected to a seat in Arizona because she would be the key vote on the House committee that would issue a discharge petition sending the Epstein files question to the floor of the House, and then the Republicans would have to vote on it. According to people I talked to, the Republicans might disintegrate in the face of this. Johnson can't face it. So he's engaged in stonewalling on the Epstein files. And in the meantime, 40 some million people are going to go hungry as a result of Johnson covering up the Epstein files. And millions of people are going to have their health care insurance exorbitantly raised as a result of this Republican action. And at the root of it is the Epstein files. There have been 1,000 FBI agents uh, assigned to expunging Trump's name from those files. We don't know what's in it. We don't know if we'll ever see them. We don't know if they've destroyed evidence of any kind. We do know that there are reports, particularly from the journalist and author Michael Wolff, who held more than 100 hours of private conversations with Jeffrey Epstein, who told him and showed him photographs of Donald Trump with naked underage girls. So, there's a lot here, and there's a huge cover up going on. And that is very much part of the retribution and rewards system that Trump is running, in part to protect himself.
Well, Sidney Blumenthal, we've run out of time, but I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thanks very much, Ian. If people want to read more, they can read the Guardian article. And it's always good to be with you, Ian.
Well, thank you, Sidney. And again, I've been speaking with Sidney Blumenthal, the former assistant and senior advisor to President Bill Clinton and a senior advisor to Hillary Clinton. He's been a national staff reporter for the Washington Post, Washington editor and staff writer for the New Yorker, and his books include the bestsellers The Clinton Wars, The Rise of the Counter-Establishment, and The Permanent Campaign. And his latest book is All the Powers on Earth, The Political Life of Abraham Lincoln, 1856 to 1860. And his latest article at The Guardian is Donald Trump has built a regime of retribution and reward. We're going to take a brief station break and back looking into how the Democrats have to form a coalition of liberals and populists to unite against Trump and focus on improving the lives of Americans, not constantly reminding us how bad Trump is.
On this side of the law, on that side of the law, who is right, who is wrong, who is for and who's against the law? Well, you see, I didn't really mean you any harm, but I simply couldn't make it on the farm. When the land won't give a lot, you gotta do with what you got.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now, Timothy Shenk, an assistant professor of history at George Washington University and a senior editor at Dissent magazine, who has written for the New York Times, The Nation, The New Republic, and Jacobin, among other publications. His new book is Left Adrift: What Happened to Liberal Politics. And he has an article at the New York Times, Democrats are in crisis. Eat the rich populism is the only answer. Welcome to Background Briefing, Timothy Shenk.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us, Timothy. And last week, there was the second No Kings rally. About 7 million Americans showed up. They did seem to be largely sort of middle-aged and older liberals. I didn't see a lot of young people. I know young people are flocking to Mandani in New York, but that doesn't necessarily work nationally. And it seems to me that the challenge that the Democrats have, among many, is how do they inspire their base to show up, and particularly young people, at the same time reach out to independents and centrist Republicans, because they're going to need a wave election to overcome the massive amount of gerrymandering, the Supreme Court basically getting rid of all of the black legislators in the South, handing the Republicans in the House 10 more seats, 12 even, before anybody even casts a vote. This is what's against them, and all these crazy election deniers that Trump's put in charge of monitoring elections. They're sending people out here to California and into New Jersey to intimidate voters here. So it's an uphill battle for the Democrats because of the massive amount of vote rigging. But just if you could focus initially on this dilemma, are they mutually exclusive, reaching out and inspiring your base at the same time, broadening it to include independents and centrist Republicans?
They don't have to be. And the most successful politicians, especially at the national level in our lifetime, have managed to do both. Weirdly, we don't think about Donald Trump this way, especially those on the Democratic or left side of the aisle. But what Trump did in 2016 and again in 2024 was by ratcheting up on issues that his base of voters was already invested in and that had some overlap with the country at large, immigration being the obvious one in 2024, and also running as a candidate who is taking on the establishment generally. The thing that Trump did that got him elected in 2016 and reelected in 24 and helped him do better than a lot of us expected in 2020 was managing to rev up his base voters while reaching out to a lot of undecided voters in the middle. Similarly, again, you wouldn't necessarily compare Donald Trump and Barack Obama in lots of ways, but Barack Obama pulled off a very similar trick, running as an outsider who had Democrats going gaga over him in the primaries, while also managing to make major inroads with swing voters who decide elections. It's a hard trick to pull off. That's why not many people do it. But if you can, then it's really, really powerful.
Right. And if Hillary Clinton had taken on Bernie Sanders as her vice president, she probably would have won, right? Because Trump was terrified that she would do that. And as you point out in your article, there's evidence that the Bernie bros who would have voted for Bernie voted for Trump.
There are a lot of them out there, and a lot of swing voters who wouldn't necessarily have gone out to caucus to vote for Bernie in a primary or caucus, but who could have been for him in the general election. Because even though we think of someone like Bernie Sanders as this far left socialist, to a lot of people who don't pay much attention to politics, he just seems like an outsider standing up for the little guy in a system that's rigged against them. He drove home that message relentlessly in the primaries. And I think if Clinton had even managed to pick up a bit of that for herself in the general election, not choosing to wage the election basically on culture war issues and defense of democracy, maybe picking Bernie as VP would have helped, maybe it wouldn't. I think the bigger mistake of that election was Clinton continually taking Trump's bait on the culture war and ending up casting herself as the defender of an establishment at a time when populism was the order of the day. So and unfortunately, this is a trap that too many Democrats have fallen into time and again over the last 8 years. I think if the party wants to turn things around, instead of defaulting into being the defender of the status quo, they need to figure out a way to tap into those populist energies for themselves.
So, Tim, your article at the New York Times, Democrats are in a crisis. Eat the rich populism is the only answer. Let's talk about Dan Osborne that you feature in your article, 50-year-old industrial mechanic and Navy veteran running for the Senate in Nebraska as an independent in 2024 when Trump beat Kamala Harris by 20 points in that state. Osborne lost by just 7. And his position on most cultural flashpoints I'm quoting from the article, tilt more libertarian than conservative. He's for gun rights but against the national ban on abortion, in favor of sealing up the border but opposed to masked men snatching immigrants off the streets. And most of the time he'd rather talk about economics, saying, I don't hang my hat on social issues, but his main target is the billionaire class ruling over us, thinking they could divide up our country. So what does this mean then? Should the Democrats ditch identity politics and unite around the war against the oligarchs, which is what Bernie Sanders and AOC have been doing?
It's not quite ditch identity politics, partly because there's some it's easy to turn identity politics into this dismissive term, and there are issues like abortion that are both popular for Democrats and crucially important to the country at large and to Democratic voters. It's more figuring out a way to build a bridge between Democratic base voters and those undecided voters who decide elections. Exactly the question that we started out discussing. And in the article, what I do is I talk about Dan Osborne, who's really, really fascinating because he's running again in 2026 for the Senate. He ran in 2024, and the extraordinary thing that happened in 24 is that of all the candidates running for the Senate last time, he outperformed expectations for what you would think anti-Trump candidate would do. He way exceeded expectations. He even did better than just in raw electoral terms than any Republican. So he had the most impressive performance relative to expectations of any candidate. And how did he do it? He did it basically by meeting voters where they are. You know, it's not that he was a massive fundraising behemoth. It's not that he was taking over social media. It's not even that he's the most charismatic guy. You can watch him give interviews and he's fine. He's compelling, but he's not Mamdani, for instance. But what he did was have a message that really resonated with the voters in Nebraska, and it was hitting hard on those economic populist issues and meeting voters where they are in the culture war, while saying too that for him, ultimately, what drives him at the end of the day, it's giving ordinary working people a fair shot in a billionaire economy. All right, so that's one part of the story. And the piece, though, what I try and do is match him up with Mamdani, who very different from Dan Osborne in all sorts of ways. And I'm not saying that the Mamdani profile, the Mamdani platform is what Democrats need at the national level, but the extraordinary thing that Mamdani did was excite young people, progressives, around an affordability agenda to get them to put those economic concerns first. And I think there's a reason why Bernie Sanders has said that he singled out both Mamdani and Osborne as examples of how to run campaigns in the Trump era. And what the next Democratic leader could do, a Democrat who could build a bridge from the Mamdani voters who can get them excited about affordability while reaching out on economic issues to the Dan Osborne swing voters, that is the makings of a new Democratic majority right there.
And your article points out that Democrats are still licking their wounds from 2024, but they might be surprised to learn that consistent liberals are the largest slice of the electorate, 43% compared with 31% for conservatives. I must say that is a surprise to me as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of us out there. But the thing is that if you divide the electorate, and this is crude, but it's useful, if you just ask voters, or split them up, are cultural liberals versus cultural conservatives, it's about dead even. There's maybe 50% cultural conservatives, 47% cultural liberals, or thereabouts. But if you divide voters into economic liberals and economic conservatives, there it's a landslide for the economic liberals. It's about 70% of the country is some kind of economic liberal, about 30% some kind of conservative. The tricky thing is, or the challenge for Democrats is going to be getting those swing voters, the ones who lean to the left on economics and to the right on the culture war, getting them to put economics over culture. And there's all sorts of different ways that they can do that, but that is the overriding challenge. Just in terms of looking at the numbers, Democrats can either choose to continue to grind out narrow victories on the culture war or reach for a bigger transformation by bringing economics back to the center of the story.
Well, but that says that that's how they should run then, right? The statistics you just gave us are pretty stark.
Yeah, it's overwhelming, but the fact is that there are a lot of reasons why it hasn't happened in the first place, right? That culture war issues, they do grab attention immediately. You can ask Kamala Harris staffers, why didn't you do this in 24? And they'll give lots of reasons. But one of them is a sort of mumbling complaint. You try and get people to care about economics when Donald Trump is talking about God knows what. And to a degree, I take the point, but this is why I think a lesson from the Sanders campaign in 2016 that's really worth taking is that if you have a candidate who really cares about economics, and by the way, this applies to Mamdani as well, It turns out that the secret sauce for getting ordinary people to believe that Democrats take economic issues, pocketbook issues seriously, have candidates who obviously do it. Don't have it be a Kamala Harris or a Hillary Clinton, or run down the list of normie Democrats who feel as if when they talk about pocketbook issues, it's as if they're being forced to eat their vegetables, but they come to life when they're talking about Donald Trump's threat to democracy. Have an AOC, have a Bernie, have a Mamdani who can speak persuasively about the importance of economics. Now, I will also say, point to AOC, she's someone who, at least for the left side of the aisle, is a natural candidate to lead this type of populist coalition, at least one would hope. But the fact of the matter is that she's been a much more polarizing candidate than Sanders hasn't overperformed expectations in the same way that Sanders has, and definitely not Mamdani. There are real obstacles standing in the way of building this kind of party. But if you just look at the numbers, this is the best of the imperfect solutions that we have available.
So let's talk about the coalition that's needed, the coalition of liberals and populists. And you say that bringing populists and liberals together in a pincer movement will take enormous skill, and the alliance could be blown apart by cultural differences that both Republicans and establishment Democrats will be eager to exploit.
Absolutely. So those, again, it's easy to say that, oh, it's great that Bernie Sanders likes Zoran Mamdani and Dan Osborne. But the Dan Osborne who's telling Nebraska voters that if Trump wants help building a wall, he's pretty handy, that is not the type of candidate that Democrats would rally to at the national stage ever. And it's worth pointing out that even though economic populism has real traction with blue collar and working class voters, there are important differences between how a lot of working class people think about economic populism and how a lot of educated, more progressive Democrats do. There's a lot of skepticism around big government, for instance, with blue collar and working class voters. Even an issue like raising the minimum wage to $20, polls well, but a lot of working class voters can be skeptical. They can be worried that a $20 minimum wage will end up cutting into jobs that they might get otherwise. Climate change, an issue that's very important for progressives, but something where when you ask working class voters what they care about most, pocketbook concerns, paying energy bills, that counts for a lot more than dealing with climate change either now or years down the road. So there are real differences to be taken seriously, but this is why it ultimately comes down to leadership, a candidate who can figure out how to walk that tightrope between culture wars that are dividing these voters in real ways, but that can be overcome and that consistently have been overcome. Democrats have been at their strongest for pretty much a century now, ever since the New Deal coalition, when they have a strong economic message that allows voters to look past all of the different cultural divisions that could separate them and join together in a common material struggle.
Well, from somebody that's lived in social democratic countries in Europe and the UK and Australia, etc., I've always thought in the US, since it seems such a right-wing country, that the only way for Democrats to get elected is to campaign right and govern left. Because if you campaign left, you never get to govern. Do you think I'm right?
No, I think that if you campaign as a consistent leftist down the line on economics and culture, that is not a way to win. Then again, I don't think Jeremy Corbyn's been prime minister of the UK, and it doesn't look like it's going to happen anytime soon. So it's not as if it's universally true. I would say, though, that there is a strong degree of economic populism in the American political tradition that really counts. The New Deal didn't come out of nowhere. There is, even though the parties haven't been neatly divided along economic lines for a long time, there was a moment from the New Deal years, the heyday of that coalition, where working class voters consolidated within a single party and provided the electoral muscle that pushed through everything from Social Security, labor regulations, all sorts of transformations of the role of government in daily life that did manage to even out the balance of power and that struggle between workers and their bosses. It's happened before, and even though there are lots of reasons why that coalition fell apart, lots of reasons why it's hard to put back together today, I still think it's possible to remake it.
Well, we are in crisis, though, Timothy. This is a criminal regime that is just, I mean, it's their model is Orban, who's both a kleptocrat and a criminal, and the Republicans admire him. But Trump is taking this so much further, and the Supreme Court is completely in his pocket. And I don't understand why the Democrats can't run against the Supreme Court, run against Mikey Johnson, who is basically shutting down the House. And, we don't even have a separation of powers anymore. The House of Representatives doesn't exist. Trump dominates, and they've shut down the House to protect a pedophile or a list of pedophiles, which is just shameful. And the fact that the Supreme Court, well, not a fact, but the likelihood the Supreme Court is going to take away all the black legislators in the South, giving the Republicans maybe 12 seats before anybody casts a vote in the midterms for the House. And all these crazies, election deniers, he's putting in charge of elections and monitoring. The idea that ICE is going to be their thugs are going to be at polling places along with military troops. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why one should be alarmed. And I'm wondering why the Democrats aren't sounding the alarm.
Because most of the voters who they need to decide those elections are so cynical about politics generally that even if you point out all the terrible things that Republicans are doing, an easy response is just to shrug their shoulders and say, yeah, Democrats are awful too. Remember when they told us that Joe Biden was sound and competent and fit to be president, right up until the second he imploded on national TV in front of everyone? This bone deep cynicism about American politics in general, and very much including the Democratic Party, it's one of the biggest obstacles they have. There's a fascinating study that just came out from this group, the Center for Working Class Politics. It looked at undecided or swing voters in the Rust Belt, working class in particular. And what they found is that even when voters, these undecided voters, responded well to a populist message, if you told them it came from a Democrat, approval just cratered. Right? You give them the same message, say it's from an independent, they like it. Say it's from a Democrat, still like it on the whole, but they like it a lot less. So the Democratic Party is just such an imperfect messenger at this point that for a lot of voters to even hear something they have to say, they have to prove that the party has changed in some fundamental way. That's why having outsiders, this is another way in which Osborne and Mamdani, even though they're so different in so many ways, they're both running against an establishment. That's not just saying that Republicans are bad, they're running against a Democratic establishment too. And that's a way of signaling to a lot of ordinary people who are deeply skeptical about all of politics that Democrats might be worth taking a gamble on this time.
Well, I think everything you're saying, Timothy, is spot on. It's just really hard for me to understand why we can't talk about the hideous and dangerous moment that we're at in this country, where 249 years of democracy is literally being stolen before us, and criminality is ruling, and cronyism and the worst stuff. And look what's happening with the demolishing the White House, the very people's house. There's so much horror going on. It's hard not to respond to that. But are you saying, just in closing, that we just should sort of swallow that and get more pragmatic?
I think that Mamdani is a great example about how to talk about this stuff. Again, I'm not saying that his specific platform is a solution for Democrats nationally. He's not a terribly popular figure at the national level. But you look at the way he campaigned in New York. What did he do? He comes out of the gate with some very concrete proposals that are simple to understand and that started fights around economic issues. Proposals like freezing the rents, proposals like free buses, like free childcare. Simple things that ordinary people could understand that put him on the side of workers. And there are all sorts of issues that came up, but again and again, the cliche around his campaign, and it's a cliche because it's true, relentless focus on affordability. And Democrats absolutely call out Trump on these egregious abuses of democratic norms, these egregious violations of democratic norms. Criticize him when he deserves to be criticized, but you got to make it clear to voters who have this very transactional attitude toward politics that Democrats care more about helping them than attacking Donald Trump. Because if you just get sucked into the sideshow where it's, oh, they're just slinging muds against each other, they don't care about my daily life, that gives people an excuse to tune out and go back to figuring out how they're going to pay the bills. You need to have concrete solutions to the problems that people are facing in their daily life, problems around affordability, jobs, education, housing, and healthcare. If you have a story to tell there from a candidate who's actually credible, that's how you can begin to make a difference.
Well, Timothy, I'm so grateful for you joining us here today. I think you're spot on, and I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. It was great.
And this has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producers Graham Fitzgibbon, Sasha Linden Cohen, and Asher Price. If you missed any of today's program or would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we include extended interviews searchable by topic and have made it easier for you to sign up for daily email updates that provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we highly encourage your ratings and reviews on those platforms. Find us on Twitter and Facebook, as well as also now on Blue Sky, at Ian Masters Media, and please do help us reach more listeners by sharing the program with friends, family, and colleagues. And to help us sustain this program into the future and ensure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And I'll be back again tomorrow with another background briefing, and I'm always available at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.
The guy that lived next door in 305